Hey, listeners, I'm currently on a break so that I can rest, write, and prepare new episodes of the podcast, which will begin airing on Thursday, September 11th, 2025. I am so excited about that episode, which is going to be with Dr. Ingrid Clayton, where we're going to discuss her new book on fawning. It is going to be amazing. Until then, I've curated an encore season of some of the most popular episodes thus far. So, if you're new to the podcast, this summer season is a great place to start. But if you've been around for a while, these episodes are definitely worth a second listen. And I know you're going to get something new out of each and every one of them. And I can't wait to hear what that is. So, be sure to share that in the comments or text the podcast to let me know. All right, let's go ahead and dive into this week's episode. Welcome to Writing Your Resilience, a podcast for writers who want to create stories that change lives, especially their own. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison. As a writer and trauma-informed writing coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey through the art of writing, self-discovery, and resilience. Each week, I'll share my best tricks, tips, and strategies to help you write more authentically, craft deeper, truer stories, and overcome the common storytelling roadblocks we all face. Together, we'll explore how to bounce back when life gets tough and stay connected to your inner calling. So grab your pen, your notebook, and an open heart. It's time to do the work that changes the world, one story at a time. How do you dive into the marrow of an experience we'll all one day share, yet so many of us struggle to talk about? And how do you write into a topic so widely covered that it feels impossible to say something new? Today, I'm joined by Amy Lin, author of the stunning micro memoir Hereafter, as we tackle these questions head on. Together, we'll explore the raw realities of grief, how Amy's memoir acts as a powerful container for this universal experience, the magic of the micro form, and what it takes to create something experimental. Plus, I'll share a transformational tool to expand how you see your stories and uncover the truths hiding within them. Get ready to reflect, learn, and most importantly, write your way through. Let's dive in. Listeners, you might know that I've spent the last decade helping writers reclaim their voices after trauma, but this is what you may not know. I'm about to teach the course I've always wanted to create. Free Your Voice, Fuel Your Motivation is a 12-week mindful memoir writing program that brings together everything I've learned about nervous system regulation, creative flow, and writing with authenticity and joy. I've designed this to help you write the truest and best versions of your stories. This process isn't about pushing harder, it's about creating the conditions where your creativity can actually thrive. And if you're ready to reconnect with the writer you truly are, this program is for you. Applications will open on August 1st. Space is limited. If you're interested, visit the link in the show notes today to learn more. I would be so honored to work with you. Amy, I am so glad to have you on the podcast today. And the reason I am so excited about our conversation is because 4 people wrote to me personally and said, Amy Lin has to be on your show.
That's so kind. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to the 4 people who connected me with you. I think it's so cool when art of any kind, be it podcasts or writing, or even just the art of feeling connects people. You know, I have been connected in that way. And I'm really grateful and honestly always moved by the ways in which Curtis and our life together continue to connect me with people.
That is one of the beautiful things about writing about these profoundly difficult experiences and, gives you a chance to say Curtis's name again and again and again, which is so important when we have lost people that are important to us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really what the lodestar of the book is.
Mm-hmm.
It's Curtis and the kind of man that he was and the way that he moved through the world. And I remember very early on when the book sold, my agent encouraged me to define before anybody else defined for me what success looked like for the book.
Mm.
And that differs for everybody.
Yes.
People who have had their first books come out. And I naively assumed that most of our lists would kind of all look the same of what we thought success would be. And
Mm-hmm.
every person that I've asked, we've had different things in the top 3 lists of success that I hope for. But my first thing and the guiding light of success has always been and is still that Hereafter would introduce as many people as possible to the man that Curtis was, and that he would continue to be known by people far beyond just my small sphere of people. And the book has really done that. And that feels like such a gift. And I think that's the gift that art offers us in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And I'm going to hold up a copy of the book. So beautiful. So if you're on YouTube, you are seeing this. If you are not and you're listening, go to your favorite place to buy books and go look this up. And not only look it up, buy your copy if you haven't already, because it is a gorgeous book. The cover is amazing and everything inside of it is just exquisitely rendered. And we're going to talk about what that's like. But I always like to give authors the first chance to tell us what the book is about or what you would like us to know about it.
Thank you. I mean, Hereafter is really a book that's in pain. It came from pain. And it was important to me when I wrote Hereafter that it reflect the realities of my grief. And that is to say, my grief is just one woman's grief. There's so many different kinds of people and there's so many different kinds of grief. And it was never intended to be some kind of monolithic idea of what grief looked like. But one thing that I did know and that I didn't feel people were comfortable with was the fact that regardless of what kind of grief you're in or how it's shaped in the world, people grieving are in pain.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people who are grieving feel like they should be in less pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted the book to be a place where people could not only meet with their pain, but also draw people into it and say, this might not be exactly like my pain, but it's something like my pain. And it would give people a physical object to offer others when they were trying to communicate the texture of their lived experience. That felt really important to me. And it's also a book about love and about
Yes.
the love that Curtis so clearly lived as his highest good. And I wanted people to know that about him and to know that it was no exaggeration, that he really lived in that way, which is such a radical way to live and has in so many ways formed the fingerprints of that kind of radical love are all over my life. I
Mm-hmm.
want other people to know that love works in that way and that it changes us in that way.
I love that it cracked that open for you. And what I would say for myself, as someone who has also experienced sudden loss, my sudden loss is different. I lost my brother, Joe, to suicide, and it's been almost 30 years.
Wow.
So we're at different places in the grieving process. And yet, when I was reading your book, I felt very connected in a very nurturing and helpful way to that early grieving process and the rawness of what it's like. And oh my gosh, when I was at that stage, I didn't have any words. And so I love that your book offers that gift of articulating what the experience of pain is like. It validates the fact that our pain is important. And, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, I don't know if you know who Yishan Lai is. She's a writer. Do you know her? She had this TikTok and she's so good on TikTok. I don't even know how she's so authentically herself all the time. I love that about her. But she was talking about how we give people a break, and the context for her story is different. And I will share that in the show notes in case someone wants to see it. But I think it's also works for people who are grieving. I cannot tell you the number of times someone has said, "Oh, I'm sorry," after I've said something about how I lost my brother. And my first response for a very long time was, "Oh, that's okay. It's okay." It's not okay. And
Yeah.
yet it's an armor that we put up both sometimes to protect ourselves, but also to protect that other person from their discomfort.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we are socialized to do that. I mean,
Yes.
people, it's such a good and human instinct to want other people not to suffer.
Yeah.
For the most part, most of us are not walking around hoping that the people around us are in pain.
Right.
And in fact, most of us are walking around, and when we see people in pain, feeling empathetic or feeling like you wish that you could help them. And
Yeah.
so I think what happens when grievers and people who are seeing grief enter
Hmm.
some kind of conversation, both parties want to help the other person 9 times
Yes.
10. But what ends up happening out of this completely good and human instinct is something that actually isn't so good for the griever and
Right.
actually sometimes makes us feel a little bit further away from our own humanness because the person tries to cheer us up and the griever tries to pretend like their pain actually isn't so bad, and neither party is actually doing the thing they want to do. It doesn't help
Right.
the grieving to be cheered up. There is no way to cheer up a grieving person. The reality of grief is that you're in pain
Yeah.
and you will always be in as much pain as you are. Some days the pain will be different than it is, but you will always experience pain.
Yeah.
And the reality is, we can't actually protect people from that. At some point, wherever somebody is in their life, they will encounter the burden of love, which is that if we love
Hmm.
people, we will be asked to grieve them if we outlive.
Yes.
That's the beautiful and brutal responsibility of love, is that
Hmm.
you may have to grieve the people that you love. And neither of us are really helping each other when we deny those facts. And part of Hereafter's work, and that I wanted it to do, was to offer people a space to be honest. For the people
Yes.
trying to support grievers to say, oh, I see how much pain you're in. Or to say, yeah, thank you for being here. Because then we're really being good to each other. Then we're really being human with each other. And that doesn't come to us naturally. We're not socialized to find that the way through. And that's what
Hmm.
makes it a tough thing, is because we're all trying to do the right thing. But sometimes with pain and grief in particular, right thing doesn't feel right at first.
Yeah. And we really aren't taught how to deal with these things. And
Yeah.
one of the things you talk about in your book is the good signs.
Yeah.
How, as a griever, you're trying to offer other people the good signs, how other people in your life are looking for the good signs. And can you say something about what those good signs were for you, which you talk about in the book? And I want everyone to buy a copy. But what would you like us to know about the good signs in your experience?
I think in my experience, the good signs are never, or I would say rarely, representative of what the griever is really feeling.
Hmm.
I think that's important. It's not to say that just because someone who is grieving brushed their hair or they put on makeup or they got a part-time job or they went on a vacation, it doesn't mean that that person didn't choose to do those things. They likely did choose to do that, but just that the action, the external part of that,
Hmm.
rarely reflects the internal reality. And it's completely fine for a grieving person to wear makeup and brush their hair and go back to work and have a job or go on a vacation. But where I think it becomes important and essential is for the people seeing that to not conflate what they see with what is.
Yes.
Lots of those things. And I was devastated. And
Hmm.
I was having difficulty getting out of bed in the morning. And I was talking to my therapist every day because I couldn't get through a day where I didn't want to live. But I had
Yeah.
perfectly done makeup. I've always done my makeup. I just always have. It's almost a habit, but it didn't make me want to live anymore.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand why it was so hard to communicate that if I had makeup on. It seemed much easier to tell people how devastated I was if I wasn't wearing makeup. And that's just another layer of grief that the grieving, I think, maybe are not resourced at that time to deal with.
Yeah.
And I'm always telling people, what you see is one thing,
Hmm.
but make sure to ask what things really are like. The griever might want to appear that way in the world, but they also might want to tell you that they're not sleeping.
Yeah.
And if we could allow people to be both, if we could just allow a greater complexity of the experience of grief into the conversation, I think we would all step to each other a little bit more tenderly.
Absolutely. I think that we get caught up in what I'll call the performance of grief. and that when people are performing grief, which is the stuff that often happens at a funeral, the crying, the sadness, or certain kinds of things, even though we all grieve differently. And we don't want to say, oh, there is this one way to grieve, and that performance of grief is legitimate and others are not, because it's not true. But there's the performance of the grief and the realities of grief. And the realities of grief is that you carry it with you wherever you go. And it's there whether you are performing it or not, and whether you have on the good look or not. Your hair
Yeah.
is done, your makeup is on. It doesn't matter.
And the performance of grief is just the vision or view of grief that we're used to seeing. It's still so much a part of,
Yeah.
we go to funerals and we cry. That's so legitimate, of course.
Hmm.
I cried, I cry so much. I still cry all the time. But there are, as you said, so many other shades and representations, faces of grief that we do see less. We don't have a curriculum of grief. We aren't educated to understand that for some people, they won't cry for years because their version of grief is very different from the traditional version we're expecting to see. They're just expressing them differently. And that's actually okay.
Yeah. And I think there's some cultural components around what grief looks like based on where you come from and what you've been taught. And some grief is very quiet.
Mhm. Yeah, and some grief is really ritualized and loud. And
Hmm.
there are many who have open mourning ceremonies
Yeah.
and rituals around loss. And all of that will inform how you grieve, who your ancestors are, who your parents are,
Hmm.
even the neighborhood that you grew up in as a
Yeah.
child. Everything informs what will come to the surface in grief. And grief has this way of bringing everything in some ways to the surface.
Yeah. And one of the things in terms of the teaching component of your book that I was like, okay, mind blown, even though I know it, every time I see it, it's like, ah, is the stages of grief and how we're using them and what they were really meant for.
Yeah, it is mind blowing. I literally learned it and I continue to speak about it. And I still think it is so shocking that for most of us, we just go through our lives and we all know that there are 5 stages of grief and that that's what it is. And then you learn, as I did, that the stages were intended for people who were processing their own mortality, that it arose out of a
Mm.
study for people who were terminally ill, who knew they were dying and would die soon. And the 5 stages came out of studying their experience as they wrestled with their impending mortality.
Yes.
And that these stages were never meant to apply to other kinds of bereavement. Somewhere along the way, we lost the distinction. And
Hmm.
now the stages seem to apply uniformly to grief, despite the fact that there is an ever growing body of knowledge that speaks very clearly and says grief is not staged. Grief does not have predictable outcomes.
Yeah.
It is not finite. There is not some phase you pass through and then you're out of it.
Hmm.
It's a lifelong process of integrating the loss and the grief that you have experienced when someone dies. And that is quite well established in grief studies, but it doesn't seem to have rocked the bedrock idea that there are 5 stages and eventually you leave grief behind. And perhaps that's again our human desire not to be in pain. This idea that we could leave grief behind. I certainly know the 4 year of Curtis dying is next week.
Mm.
I have days where I feel like I am back, as you said, in those early days.
Yeah.
They don't ever leave me. I just have less of them back to back. But there are some
Hmm.
days where I am right back in the
Yeah.
early days. And it's been almost 4 years.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel far to me, and it doesn't feel long. It feels like grief is always soon because you
Hmm.
could turn around a corner and it could be there, or it might not be. And that is the reality of grief. And that's completely and entirely opposed to the idea of stages.
Absolutely. And my heart is connecting to yours. And one, I just want to say I'll be thinking about you next week as you hold space for that anniversary. They're always interesting and complicated and wonderful and all of the things in their own ways and unpredictable,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
sometimes when you go through these anniversaries, the week leading up to it or the month leading up to it is hella hard, and then the day of is relief, and it's good in some way, and then other times it surprises you. And
So
that
true.
happened to me this year in February. I was at the AWP conference. I was going to
Hmm.
be speaking that afternoon, and that morning it was the anniversary of my brother's loss, and it was 27 years. And you would think, that's a good long time, right? And so I was just shocked by the fact that I found myself sobbing uncontrollably over my eggs.
Yeah.
And yet there was a part of me that's like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. And I think I love what you said about grief is always soon. And that's very true. And I think the difference between what I would call young grief, and I think that your grief, in my experience, I would call it young grief.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
would
it's
too.
yeah, it's like toddler grief. Where mine is older, but the difference between what I would say young grief and older grief is just the experience of recognizing that this happens, and the sense of acceptance of like, oh yeah, I'm crying over my eggs. Of course I am. I'm going to go back to my hotel room and have a fabulous breakdown for an hour or two, and then I will put my makeup back on, and then I will go down and I will speak at the conference and do all of the other things.
That's exactly it. And this was a beautiful gift that was given to me by a poet actually at a dinner party right around the 2-year anniversary of Curtis's death. I was just standing in line for food. I was at a writing residency, and the poet behind me asked me about the book, and I was working on Hereafter at the time. And I said, yeah, the 2-year anniversary is in a few weeks. And she looked at me and she said, well, that's soon. And I just immediately cried, like full
Mhm.
sob in the middle of this dinner. And I said, it is soon. And
Yeah.
so many people, we get a year, and then people are like, well, that's in the past.
Mhm.
And they don't really think of grief, as you said, as young or fresh or soon after the 1 year. But the reality is, grief therapy taught me the first 5 years are all acute.
Mhm.
Don't even
Yeah.
enter a new phase until year 6.
Yeah.
And when she witnessed that for me, when she mirrored that back to me, she
Mhm.
saw the full breadth of my pain. And it was such a relief to put that down and say, yeah, it is soon. Like
Mhm.
you said, as I've continued to meet people, I just was speaking to a man yesterday, and it came up that I was a writer, and he asked about the book. And I was telling him about Curtis. And he said, well, my son died at 20 years ago. And I said the same gift that I was given. I said, well, that must be soon some days. And he
Yeah.
immediately cried and
Mhm.
said, yeah, some days it's like he might just come back.
Mhm.
I thought, 20 years,
Yeah.
so soon. And hearing your story,
Mhm.
27 years, and you sit down for eggs,
Yeah.
and he's just not there, and you suddenly remember.
Mhm.
I think that's a gift you've given me, the poet gave me, that gentleman gave me. It's a gift we give each other when we say, hey, you still love them because you're still grieving them.
Yes.
That's what it is. We will always love those people, so we will always grieve them.
Mhm.
The more place that we give that, the tenderness that we offer that, I think the better we hold each other and the better we hold love. We limit love when we give it only a year.
Yes.
How unfair.
Yeah, and year 2 is often worse than year 1,
I
and
found
nobody wants
it
to say that.
way worse than year.
Yes.
It was brutal for me.
Oh, it was brutal for me too. And I think one of the things is that, especially in American society, this idea that, okay, 1 year, you're
Yeah.
done, one and done, come
Yeah.
on. You know, Nobody's holding space for that. And yet, as you so eloquently said, some days it feels so soon. And I always tell people, grief is love looking for a place to go.
Yeah.
And when we bear witness to each other's grief, when we offer each other these gifts, we give that love somewhere to go.
Grief is the final form of love. And it is the final place, the final way that love manifests itself as we move through the world. And certainly for me, when Curtis and I got married, we were young and we thought that time was going to be gentle.
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought about how far love would take us. And
Yeah.
in my case, it took me all the way to the crematorium.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a place that when I thought about the end of love, I didn't think about a crematorium, but it is a
Yeah.
sacred journey. Even
It
that
is.
felt sacred to me, that that was as far as I could go. And
Mm.
then I went a little bit further when I wrote the book. And I've always been grateful for that, that love has allowed me to continue in its journey with Curtis, even though Curtis has gone beyond me.
I'm just sitting with all that for a second. So if you're listening to the podcast, that is the silence. Because this is such a love story. And the people that wrote to me, one person in particular that I'm thinking about, I don't know if she wants her name on air, so I'm not going to say it, but you know who you are. This is a person who holds a lot of grief in their life about a variety of things. And your book is both grief and love story. It is both
Yeah.
and it's written in this unique way. So you have embraced this micro form that's very nonlinear, back and forth a lot, not necessarily with a specific strict logic, which some books have. So I feel in that way it's mirroring grief. But
Yeah.
how did you know this was the right structure for this book? And what did this structure teach you about writing and also about writing about grief?
Such a good question. I chose the structure because it was essential to me when I wrote the book that it mirror the experience of grief as I was
Mm-hmm.
experiencing it, which is to say that I find that grief shatters time. It
Yeah.
certainly shatters the illusion that we in any way can control time. And it shattered the illusion of a past and a present for me because my past lived at the same frequency and sometimes even more intensely than actually what was happening to me. My
Mm-hmm.
life with Curtis felt more real to me than the realities of grieving him. And grief
Yeah.
puts us in this liminal space where there isn't any time.
Mm-hmm.
And it puts us in this space where we're trying to catch up to a reality that we have absolutely no way of grasping.
Yeah.
What we can grasp, what we do understand, is the beloved. And they
Mm-hmm.
feel more real than what
Yes.
actually is real. And the only way I could find to replicate that in writing was to use the present tense. So everything, even things that happened in the past, are still happening actively. And then also to move as I move in and out of what is past and what is present,
Mm-hmm.
those moments lived exactly beside each other. Because when you're in grief, you are living outside of time, and those
Yeah.
moments are happening to you just like everything else is happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it was important to me to mirror that. And it's funny, writing in that way revealed to me the power of our lived experience. People often will say, "You remember so much about Curtis and about his life." And part of that is because I was obsessed with Curtis and I just wanted to know everything about him. And the other part of that is because grief, I think most people would say, heightens what we remember. There is a
Mm-hmm.
period of grief where everything feels technicolor.
Yes.
Things flood back to us in a way that almost as if they are returning to us before they really leave. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt acutely in that time that I wanted to hold on to as much of it as I could because I knew, as is the nature of life, that I would lose it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to try to pin down as many of the butterflies as I could. And I didn't get all of them. And a book can't hold all of them. But I got a lot of them. And I was grateful for that because, as I said at the start, I needed Hereafter to be a place for grief, but also
Mm-hmm.
for Curtis. And as
Yeah.
much of those lived in details of him that I could remember and put in a place where the place would remember for me, I wanted to do that. In terms of what it taught me about writing, a kind of unexpected lesson was that I again naively assumed people would go, "Oh, this is what grief is like." But so many people, well, not so many people, but lots of people have said, "I don't think I really get this." And I was like, whoa, I did something experimental, I realize now. That, but I didn't intend to be experimental. I didn't feel like I was trying to reinvent how you think about a memoir, but it has been reflected back to me a couple times now that I wrote something that bent the idea of memoir in a
Mhm.
way that I thought, well, grief bent me. It bent me out of shape. And how could you write about it in a narrative container that is obedient to the tyranny of time?
Mhm.
And I think that's what the structure is not, is it does not obey what we might think of as a traditional narrative arc or a traditional idea of time in a memoir. It doesn't answer to that. But I thought, but that's grief. It just doesn't answer to any traditional container. And I
Yeah.
wanted space for grief to live as it is.
Mhm. And I think what works so well, and I love the answer that you just gave, is that because it's a micro form, we're able to hold space for that. And I think people who have experienced profound loss, which we all will at some point in our lives, but if you've yet to experience that, the experimental form, which I do see this as experimental in some
Yeah, I
ways.
think it is. I
Um,
just you see it
yeah,
whenever.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But it mirrors grief, and I think the people who have grieved get it because 'cause they're like, "Oh, yeah, this is what it's like for me to go back and forth in time. I'm in all of these places." And I've worked with authors who have experienced deep grief, and they're writing more linear stories, which
Yeah,
for some people, they need to write a linear story to
absolutely.
to tame the chaos. That's an important piece of the process for them, but they try to emulate that back and forth in a way that does not work for linear memoir. Like if you had written this as a linear 3-act story following hero's journey of, death to healing, all of this back and forth would lose people more. And for me, I was never lost.
Yeah.
I felt held and I felt seen in the experience that I have had.
Mm. Well, I'm so glad to hear that. And I think that's the lesson for me as a writer is I didn't set out to write something experimental. I set out to write something true to my experience,
Mhm.
and it took me into experimental territory. But I don't think if I had set out to write something experimental, I would have written Hereafter. I would have written something that would have been untrue to my experience.
Mhm.
So as a writer, I was grateful that I just followed what was going to be the way forward for me. And
Mhm.
it brought me into something that I love and that I'm really proud of that it dawned on me later was experimental. And I thought, oh, I've never thought of myself as that kind of a artist, but we all have to find different tools and ways
Yeah.
in grief. And so I was unsurprised when people started saying that to me. I thought, well, of course I reached for something I've never reached for before. That's what all of grief is.
Mhm. And I think it's even more magnified when you're grieving someone young and we're not grieving the standard what I would say the standard story of grief. The standard story of grief is you're born, you live a long life, and then at a point in time which is the appropriate age to die, whatever that is, something happens and then your life ends. But when someone dies young and they're outside of what we consider to be the cycle of life, it disrupts our notions of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, they call them out of time deaths,
Mhm.
which is such a remarkable phrase that when we die young, we die out of time, as if time is a fixed construct to which we are all owed a certain amount.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I don't think that we're owed maybe anything,
Yeah.
and certainly not owed a certain amount of time on the earth. And when we people die out of time, I always think that it can be so painful. And it is painful. That Curtis loved living so much. And he has
Mhm.
so little time to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's so painful. But I don't think of it as out of time because I don't think of it as unfair. I think of it as tragic
Yeah.
and awful. But I think something about that phrase, as beautiful as it is a little misleading about what we really are owed and are not owed. I wish Curtis had had more time, but we get what we get.
Yeah,
And I think what Curtis had, he made so beautiful.
he
And
really
that's,
did.
that's would that we would all be so lucky as to make something as beautiful as Curtis did.
You made me fall in love with him.
Mm, I'm so
And
glad.
I always like it when someone can do that. But I really fell in love with him alongside you. And I really wanted to spend time with him. And you gave me that opportunity.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for you taking that opportunity, truthfully. And anytime people witness Curtis and our story, it's a gift. It really is.
It's another chance for his name to be said.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to reiterate something that someone said and then go in an experimental direction, which we
Okay.
talked about a little bit beforehand. So one of the things that I want new writers in particular to hear is that there's two pieces. So one, Amy followed her heart. She followed the journey of writing that she needed to go on. She didn't think in the beginning about structure in this in the sense of like I'm writing this or I'm writing that. She just wrote and that helped her figure out what it was. It was the process of writing. There was this evolution. And sometimes I'll hear people say, I want to write a fancy book. And that's why I call it the fancy book. I'm going to write a patchwork quilt of stories, or I'm going to write a spiral structure. You've probably heard people say these things.
Yeah.
And those are elegant structures when they work. But understanding how stories work so that you can move through the meaning making process is important. I will say that as a trauma informed writing coach and as someone who studies that piece, but we all come to it in different ways. And so, what I always tell people when they come to me for writing advice is I'll say, well, it depends. And here are some invitations. And
Yeah.
your job as the writer is to figure out which invitation speaks to you, but to always have an openness
Yeah.
to what it could be because the story is being birthed inside you and through you as you show up to it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I this is such a rich conversation. I feel like we're already going deep, which I love about this. And I just want to take this to a slightly deeper level. And I want to give a quick shout out to Lily B, who is a Chicago-based Latina Moth Grand Slam champion, who is a story genius. She
Mm.
calls herself a story producer. I'm going to say story genius. She just is. I mean, she's incredible as a live storyteller. I'm going to put one of her moth episodes on so people can listen, but also she has this genius way of teaching people storytelling. So you need to check her out. But one of the things we were talking about in a class I'm taking with her last night on story production is story neighborhoods.
Mm.
And so one of the things that we're talking about is where does this story live? And the way we talk about it is think about your book, which is kind of a bigger story, but what would you consider to be a noun that you would associate with it? And what is a feeling? And when you put those two together, that's going to create the neighborhood of your story. So I have an answer for myself of what I think it is. And we're going to compare to what you think the book is, because I always think it's interesting to see what does a reader take from a book versus what is a writer trying to accomplish.
Wow, I love that. Do you go first or do I go first?
Either one is fine with me.
Oh, you go first.
Okay. So I was thinking about this earlier today, and this is the story of love. It is also a story of grief, and it's a story of a body that breaks down in response to grief. I was thinking about how Curtis died. It was so sudden that
Yeah.
this story lives in the neighborhood. It's on the corner of body and abandonment.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
That's where it fell for me, and I'm curious to know where it fell for you.
I love that. Yours is so good. I would say, I think we're similar in terms of our noun. I would say this lives at the corner of the marrow and the pain.
Mm,
Yeah. I love
yeah.
yours. I think yours has such a like a fullness to it, which I really like.
Well, I like yours in the sense that marrow is so deep.
Yeah, that's what I love that you picked the body because I was also moving to the body, but I wanted to go even more granular. is it really, especially those very condensed paragraphs, it is very granular
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And the thing about marrow is that it's essential to the
Mm-hmm.
body. You can't actually exist without marrow, but it is incredibly hard to access
Yeah.
and incredibly painful to access if you need some kind
Mm-hmm.
of, it's very, very painful. And yet it is so essential. We're all walking around with it. And we don't really think about it until we're somebody who needs it. And I think grief and the book live at that intersection, is we might not think about some of the things that hereafter holds until we know somebody who's in it, or until we ourselves are in it.
Absolutely. And that was such a beautiful way to talk about it. And what I like about it is when I think about, and I might be getting this wrong. So if somebody hears this and they're like, your biology is wrong, Lisa, feel free to correct
I
me.
could be wrong.
I'm totally fine with that. But I believe that your marrow, it's related to your immune system. And I think it creates the red blood cells.
I believe it does. I was afraid of
Yeah.
that because I wasn't sure, but yes, I think it does too.
Well, I will say that for us. We'll hold space if that's the case. And your red blood cells are the part of you that holds your oxygen. And that's what allows the body to function. So I think that's just such a beautiful way to think about this, in that the marrow is nourishing us. It is helping us function, and yet it is hard to access. And it is what we gain access to through grief.
Yeah, it is. You realize, I think grief for me certainly exposed what the marrow of my life was, as I continued to
Mhm.
ask myself why I should continue to exist in the wake of Curtis's death.
Yeah.
It forced me to consider what my marrow was and what
Mhm.
I was going to get on with living for. And I think that's a really intense and large thing to confront, especially as you said, when you're not the age that other people are. For some other
Yeah.
people, the marrow is very obvious. They have different contexts and different things in their life.
Mm.
For me, being so young, it seemed for a while that I couldn't see what those things were.
So, what is the marrow that you have discovered?
For me, it's writing. And I always thought it was very romantic, bordering on silly, when I would have writers tell me there will be a time in your life where writing will save your life.
Hmm.
I thought, okay, we're not curing cancer, we're writing books, you know? And then a time came in my life where writing did save my life. It was the only thing I could do. I physically was so ill, I couldn't actually do anything else. And it was the only thing I was able to show up for. And in turn, it showed up for me. And the other thing, the other marrow, was love.
Yeah.
Curtis saved my life because he loved me. And because when he died, I had to accept that fact.
Yeah.
I had to accept that he saw a version of myself that was lovable. And it's so painful to accept the version of ourselves that the people who love us say we are.
Hmm.
Often they offer us tenderness that we don't actually want to give to ourselves.
Yes.
And it is, again, so limiting when we don't let people tell us the truth, the tender truth about who we
Hmm.
are. When Curtis died, I had to accept who he thought I was. And that was somebody who was loved.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, those are the two things, and still are the two things that I get out of bed for.
Mm. That's beautiful. And what I remember from your book is that he truly believed in your ability to be a writer. He saw you as a writer, even though he did not get to see and hold this book. He held space for what is true. And my heart is connecting to yours in the sense that there came a point in time in my life when my body was failing and writing was the only thing that I could show up for. And like you, it showed up for me and it truly did save my life.
Me
And
too.
so, yeah, it does. And we don't think about that and we don't value the role these things play in our lives, and the alchemy and the healing that happens when we allow ourselves to open up to our stories and to who we truly are.
Exactly. That's what I didn't understand when people would say that to me. It was, I think, well, how can love save anyone in writing? But as you said, for some of us, maybe for all of us, but certainly I think for writers, there is something that we can access when we are writing that is
Mm-hmm.
essential to how we process the world. And I was so grateful to have that. That was the thing that I had. And not everybody does. I've had other friends who grieve with different things that I don't have.
Yeah.
But writing was what I had. And I am so grateful to have that and to be carried by it. And now join the ranks of people who say to writers, I hope that that time is a long way away, but probably there is a time when writing will carry you.
Well, I love how your writing is carrying all of us. And we've had such a rich conversation, and you have shared so many interesting bits of writing wisdom. As we begin to wrap up, do you have one last nugget? You're like, I haven't said it yet, but I really want you to know. And it's fine if you don't, because you've given us so much.
Oh, that's so generous. Your questions have been so incredible. Thank you. It's such an art to ask a beautiful question. You've asked so many. I think one thing that I'm really holding these days, it's really on my mind just because the 4 years is next week, is I'm thinking a lot about love and what
Mm-hmm.
it asks of us and how terrible it can be sometimes and heavy to
Yeah.
hold. But alongside that, I've been really holding something that Curtis taught me. I've been thinking a lot about. It's in the book, that moment where he fills his car so full of balloons for my birthday that he gets into a car accident because he
Yes.
can't see out of his windows. And I don't know, I think about that. And I think, wow, I hope we all love someone so much that we just get into a little bit of trouble for them. It feels just like the most amazing thing to me.
It truly is. And I'm glad that you've had that. And I wish that for every single person who's listening and those who are not, that we all get that experience.
Yeah, me too.
So you are in the middle of your book launch. Your book came out in March, and I talked to many writers that are in their book launch year. I had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Ramani Durbasula. I don't know if you know who she is, but she was on the podcast. And oh my gosh, if you want to see someone working it during book launch, she was working it so
Wow.
hard. And she continues to do that in so many incredible ways. I mean, she's just an amazing powerhouse. And so are you. And so, how are you caring for yourself in what I call the publishing gauntlet of year one?
It is such an amazing whirlwind to be in, but it is a whirlwind. And I
Yeah.
think for myself, I have scheduled breaks. So I had a very clear understanding going in of the months that I would be really packed with events.
Mm-hmm.
I, made sure I slept really well and I made sure I was eating really well and just really ensured I was set up to constantly show up as vulnerably and as fully as I could for the book. And that's important to me, that whenever I do an event, and I do choose the ones that I do pretty
Mm-hmm.
carefully, that I was really there. And then to compensate for that, I also blocked out large chunks of weeks where I wasn't doing events.
Mm-hmm.
And I was regulating by just returning to routine. I am in some ways not particularly flashy in that way, as I regulate in a boring routine, which is to say, I like to go to bed early. I like to get up at the same time, and I like to write. And so I've had about a full month or two, maybe this summer, where I wasn't doing events and I was consistently writing, and it returned me to baseline, which
Nice.
is important. I think it's important to spend time, even in grief, finding
Mm-hmm.
small ways to return to whatever baseline looks for you in that moment,
Yeah.
so that you just are in the practice of going out and coming back to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And grief really taught that to me in a way that I hadn't learned before, and I continue to practice it. And tending to grief in that way is so much about tending to yourself.
Absolutely. And I love that you are so honest about the boring nature of self-care. I,
Boring.
I'm I know people will ask about my life, and yes, of course, there are times when exciting things are happening, but 90 to 95% of the time, and I'm very happy about this, it's pretty boring
What
in
a luxury
very,
to be boring,
I
truthfully.
know. It is. And I think about my earlier life, which was very chaotic, not boring at all, but also very taxing. That it is a gift to be able to have a boring life that has gentle routine and, the capacity to care for myself and return to myself. Because I think for all of the trauma survivors who are listening, and that is a good portion of this audience, and some of them are dealing with grief and they're dealing with other things, boring is good. Your nervous system will tell you otherwise, but boring is good because it's where you find yourself.
It is. It's in a lot of ways very soothing. And
Yes.
grief can be boring. That's,
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that the rhythms of grief can be unpredictable, but they can also sometimes what you're going to expect, and finding, as you said, soft rituals and habits
Yeah.
around that to hold that and to cultivate some of that sense of, well, I know what's happening, is very soothing. It's certainly soothing for my brain to feel like it knows what's happening. And in grief,
Mm.
a lot of the times I felt like I didn't know what was happening. And I had to create structures around myself. And book tours like that, it feels
Yeah.
wild. You have no idea day to day really what it's going to be like. And rituals that you do know what they're
Mm-hmm.
like. So for me, eating certain foods or getting up a certain time are really important to me because they help me feel grounded and like I
Yes.
understand at least how I'm going to eat or how I'm going to wake up. And
Mm-hmm.
that's proved really important for me. But like I said, it's not a particularly sexy self-care.
But it's the most important. So maybe that does make it sexy. We just don't understand what sexy really is.
You're right. Yes. I'm going to reinvent how we're thinking about sexy self-care.
There you go. I love it. And I can't wait to see how this flourishes in all of the things that you do.
Thank you.
Well, I want everyone to buy your absolutely gorgeous book. I also want them to continue to connect with you and see what you're up to. So, what are the best ways for people to buy your book and also to connect with you online?
Best ways to buy hereafter is definitely either your local library, where librarians often will have them on hold or hopefully copies in store. I grew up a child of libraries, and it's an honor literally every time someone tags me in a picture with a library book. And I always encourage people to go, if possible, to their local bookstores and to support just the people that champion books. Hereafter
Mm,
would have reached nobody without booksellers. They
yes.
really are the heart of books. Booksellers connect writers like myself and everybody else together. And I'm also a reader.
Hmm.
So I've been on the other side of that. Booksellers have connected me, the reader, to other writers.
Yes.
And they're the connection point. And I think that can be lost sometimes in our instant ship world, that there's so
Hmm.
many people that can connect you with another person. So that's really important. And then Bookshop for online is obviously so great because it pulls from independent bookstores. And then for me online, I talk about books and grief and a little bit about my life on Instagram at Literary Amy. And people often say, oh, I'm sure you get tons of messages, but people are always welcome to reach out. I can be really slow responding to any message of any kind, but I always read them and I do get to them eventually. And then I also still write my Substack at the bottom of everything, where I talk about living with really big feelings.
Hmm.
And yeah, that started, well, it would have started 4 years ago when Curtis died. And I still write twice a month. And it's a really beautiful community, and people can connect with me there too. I'm sure there are other ways people could find me, but that's all I can think of right now.
Well, if you find something else, please send me the information because
Oh,
all of this will show up in the show notes so anyone can get in contact with you. And yeah, shout out to local libraries. The great thing about ordering a book through the library is that you're not only getting access to the book, you are giving someone else access to the book who may not be able to afford it. And so that is a gift that keeps on giving. And then, yes, your local bookstore is amazing. And wherever you buy it, be sure to write a 5-star review and leave it on Amazon and Goodreads, no matter where you bought it, and also Barnes and Noble, because this is how we support authors.
it does make such a difference. I always really appreciate that.
Well, Amy, thank you so, so much for being on the podcast. It was truly an honor.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for opening such a beautiful space for us to talk about the things that ultimately we all share and we all carry together. And I've just really appreciated our conversation. I'm really grateful.
I am grateful as well. And I'm going to be thinking about this one for a very long time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about this week's guest, please see the show notes for this episode. But before you go, I would love it if you would text the show if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or leave a comment on YouTube letting me know your biggest takeaway for this episode or what you loved most about it. And speaking of your comments, I want to thank each and every one of you for the comments that you have shared thus far and the ways that you've reached out to me through email, my Substack, and all of the different ways that you have to connect with me. It has been such an honor to get your feedback and to hear what you love about the podcast. Thank you so, so, so much. I look forward to engaging with it more in the future. And listeners, if you haven't had a chance to connect with me or to share something about the podcast, I would love to hear from you too. Until next time, please remember that your story matters. And as you work on it, you change lives, especially your own.